Okay, so I kind of hate myself for going with what I have to assume will be an obvious cliche, but it does kind of say it all about the state of serious political filmmaking in modern Hollywood that Sacha Baron Cohen is the lead of both this film and one of the co-leads of the Trial of the Chicago 7, and of the two, the one which makes the most use of his relevant talents as an actor, politically astute individual, and activist is the bad taste gross-out comedy sequel to his one-joke caricature breakout from 15 years ago. And yet, yeah, somehow the strangest, stupidest year ever had one other twist waiting, as it turns out Cohen and his crew had been secretly shooting a Borat sequel all around the United States and ended up doing so right in the middle of both the election and the coronavirus pandemic, incorporated both things into the plot of the film, and somehow ended up with a movie that delivers more of the same but also something entirely different, a worthy sequel both in continuation and in conversation with its predecessor and its own place in the popular culture landscape, and whether or not by design or happenstance ends up engaging directly with the most lasting criticism of the first Borat, i.e. don't cartoonish caricatures of racist, sexist, etc. characters like this end up giving license to actual bigots to obscure their behavior behind claims of irony, and might that not have, I don't know, not great unintended consequences? Ahem. The resulting sequel is probably on balance something that feels more like an actual movie as opposed to extended TV skit than the first one, and will probably age better overall, though by the very nature of comedy sequels, it's also not exactly as viscerally outrageous or dangerous in that nature. Now, that's not to say that my jaw didn't drop wide open at several points, but it's interesting that in at least two of the most prominent cases this time around it involved plot points and gags that were clearly staged or outright movie parts as opposed to the improvised or authentic reaction gags. I'm not sure how you'd quantify whether or not that makes this or the original better, though, since almost everything that works about this relies on the omnipresence of the original's impact in the original cultural zeitgeist. This is, in the text, subtext, and metatext, a movie about Borat the person navigating the world after Borat the movie. The conceit here is that the documentary Borat was making for his country in the first film, as in the first film itself, ended up being released in the United States and became a huge hit as an unintended comedy, which in turn was so embarrassing for Kazakhstan that Borat has been condemned to a hard labor prison camp for the past 15 years, only to be pulled back out Rambo 2 style by the government for a new mission. They believe that President Trump's willingness to partner with other great leaders like Vladimir Putin, Jair Bolsonaro, Kim Jong-il, etc. means he'll be similarly amenable to them, and they want Borat to redeem himself by returning to America and personally delivering a bribe to the Trump administration. Now, that's more than enough of a hook for the first of two major focus pivots that differentiate the sequel from the original, whereas the first film was a scattershot satire aimed at a largely random sampling of Americans' reaction to Borat's own not simply strange, but specifically grotesque, racist, sexist, and backwards-thinking behavior. This time the narrative points him squarely at the various permutations of the American right wing, not only the Trump administration itself, but also devout Trump voters, religious conservatives, anti-abortion crisis center scammers, QAnon cultists, Republican women's groups, even a much ballyhooed trip to the CPAC, and a now infamous encounter with Rudy Giuliani himself. And the live reaction shock comedy itself is less about the anticipation of what will they say than it is about the ever-growing horror at realizing Borat's once cartoonish, over-the-top ignorance and bigotry no longer being all that alien or out of step. In Trump's America, at least the thoroughly magnified toxic swamps he visits here, Borat fits in just fine now. And that's almost funny enough to not be terrifying. But it's the second hook that lifts the whole endeavor to another level. Through happenstance, Borat ends up being joined on his quest by a previously unknown to him teenage daughter, who becomes co-conspirator and eventually the actual bribe itself that she and he believe need to be offered to someone adjacent to the White House to save their country. Along the way, Borat attempts to educate her using the hilariously misogynistic science textbook from Kazakhstan about the development and proper roles of women, while she alternately finds herself tempted by more American concepts of her capabilities, mostly from surprising and apparently largely unscripted, sincere sources that altered the planned course of the plot, which is just wild. Now, it would be deeply inappropriate for me to spoil any further of where the story and her journey in particular is going, but suffice it to say, relative newcomer Maria Bakalova displays remarkable comedy and acting chops in the part, way more than holds her own with Cohen, and their dynamic ends up giving the film an actual sense of heart and a point without diluting the main dark joke that's still at the core of both of their personas. In as much as, like the first time around, even if Borat is going to learn a lesson, it doesn't necessarily mean he's actually going to improve as a person. I have a feeling that, well, in a few years' time, it's going to hold up pretty well on revisitation, but this is still very much a movie of the moment in terms of its biggest laughs being based on right here, right the hell now events. I can't imagine that the urgency of it will feel as vital in the immediate aftermath of the actual election, however that's going to go, and you really should see the big spoiler stuff before everyone gives it away, because in the moment it really does feel like an all-timer. So for now, I'm calling Borat subsequent movie film delivery of prodigious bribe to American regime for make benefit of once glorious nation of Kazakhstan a very strong 7 out of 10. Check it out.